well?
Okay, let me start the recording. So this is the Nephio Observability meetings for June 18th, 2024. So yeah, go ahead, Pietro, all yours.
So can you hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Share screen. Well, I have to say that I didn't prepare a lot of slides, but we can go through the code, etc., to understand what we did. It's not very big deal, but we spent some time on the topics we discussed, and we believe it's worth to share with you guys. Just what I like I said, the topic is not right, but just like I said on the Slack, we did few tasks. If you have any questions while I'm talking, just interrupt and we can discuss further. So we have implemented the proposed architecture using Open Telemetry components. What is the proposed architecture? If you may recall, we proposed something like that. It's maybe not final, but at this stage, for us, it's some kind of reference that we have the management and our orchestration plane, where we have remote observability stack with some kind of observability controller to access the data. And this data can be accessed by the management and the orchestration to perform some tasks like service assurance, preventive maintenance, and data-driven orchestration. This data is stored in the permanent storage here, somewhere in the cloud. To the remote observability stack, the data is pushed from the workload clusters. So workload clusters in the Nephio context are the clusters where we can deploy things. Right, so we are running on those the custom Kubernetes operators like 35DC operator. Those operators are managing the network functions, and all the data from the infrastructure, from the Kubernetes, from the operator, from the network functions, everything is stored, everything is collected at the edge observability stack level and then pushed to the remote stack observability. And just like I said, the data can be accessed to perform better orchestration. In details, it looked like this. So we assume that we will have on the workload, first of all, we will have some kind of eBPF mechanisms to efficiently collect the data. We will have auto collectors. So on each cluster, we assume we have auto collector of type demo set to collect the data related with the nodes, let's say. And then this data is pushed the second collector, per cluster collector, which is of type deployment. Here we can implement per cluster data collection, some data processing like labeling, etc. In the future work, some data classification to push the data to the remote or the local backend. At this point, we are pushing data to both, and it needs to be discussed if this approach is really required to push your data locally or centrally. For now, we assume it's here, and then this classification would be more interesting. Well, yes, so also auto collectors as a sidecars, we didn't implement any custom collectors, but we utilized the auto instrumentation or zero code instrumentation from the auto community to auto instrument the pre-5GC network functions. In the Golang, it's not that obvious, just like in the not compilable languages, but it's available for the Go code using eBPF, and for now, it's the only field where we use the eBPF auto instrumentation of the pre-5GC network functions. Unfortunately, it's not very good at this moment, and it includes only HTTP and gRPC protocols. A lot of adjustments needed to make it really useful. And this is the progress. We don't have yet any observability controller to share the data. I mean, we are working on some clients to access the backends, but I will talk about backends in a moment. But all the pipelines, like the collectors here and the collectors here, they are already in place. The only difference from this proposed architecture and what we have right now is that we are considering the additional observability cluster rather than putting all the observability in the management, I mean, Nephio cluster, let's say. So we will have, in this point, we will have the local backends both on the workload cluster and on the Nephio cluster, and the data will be pushed to the additional observability cluster or observability something. It doesn't need to be the Kubernetes, but it could. So come back to the list. We selected and integrated example backends for metrics, logs, and traces. So the backends could be selected as you wish. For the logs, we selected the Elasticsearch, just like for the traces as a backend. Traces are pushed to the Elasticsearch via Jaeger collector, and the logs are pushed from the auto collector via APM server to the Elastic server. And for the metrics, we could as well use the Elasticsearch, but we decided to use at this point Prometheus for the local backend and Grafana MyMir for the remote backend. So the metrics from the collector are pushed or to the Prometheus in any case, because MyMir is just Prometheus implementation for, let's say, multi-cluster scenarios. We made minor extensions to the FreeFireDC operator to manage all FreeFireDC network function and enable zero-code auto-instrumentation. As you may remember, I mean, our work was related to the tasks for the R2 release on the FreeFireDC. So we took this code and we modified the FreeFireDC operator, and now it's not only manages UPF, SMF, and AMF, but it's simple because it's not very well, it's not a production ready operator, but we added the support for all the FreeFireDC network functions, including MongoDB and including the web UI. Also, we added some code to add labels because it's annotation, to add annotation to these network functions that auto-instrumentation is possible. But I will show maybe this in a second. We configured receivers, processors, and exporters, just like we show on this pipeline. We have receivers which collects the data, processors which can modify and enrich the data with some metadata or remove the data which is not very needed. And exporters are responsible to push the data to the backends. There are some connectors which could be useful, but at this point we didn't implement any connector, but it could be useful in our case. The 5. We use Nephio-like specialization to tailor auto collector packages. So maybe I will show this on the example. We prepared all the necessary kept packages, just like for FreeFireDC or network functions. It's obvious that we need those. We also prepared them for the CNOS. And the CNOS, I recall it, we named Cloud Native Observability Stack for short. So here we have the backends I mentioned. We have Open operator because on each cluster there is an operator which manages Open Telemetry collector custom resources. And we have those auto daemon set for Nephio, auto deployment for Nephio, auto daemon set for the workload, and auto deployment for the workload. So here we can see the specialization. In the CR, which is Open Telemetry collector, we assume that we will add some metadata using labels and annotations. So as you can see in this blueprint, we have only the example and the missing fields. And we use the Nephio-like specialization to, let's see in the GT what is live here. Deployment collector and over CR, right? As you can see, here we have some more data, like labels, edge 1, US West, and site type edge, just like we have in the R2 release, in the 356 exercises. Also, some annotation with the remote backends were added. And those backends, it's not yet very intelligent. It would be good while deploying, let's say, backends, we will be able to find those. But at this point, they are provided by the config map. Just make the config map so that we have the matrix local traces backend. As you may guys remember, we can apply replacements. And here I defined the replacements to add the CR. So this is only the part related to the Nephio-like specialization. At this point, we can go through maybe sample receivers, the processors, etc. So for the deployment, as a receiver, we have OTLP, and on this OTLP receiver, we are receiving the data from the daemon set. So the collectors which are running on the all Kubernetes nodes are pushing the data here. We have the Kubernetes cluster to collect the data about the Kubernetes itself, like CPU, memory, storage, and those are the metrics. The next one is very important for us, the Kubernetes objects. Here we can specify the CRs you would like to observe. We can pull the data or we can watch the data. And the very interesting aspects are events and deployments, because Nephio probably would like to see the status of NF deployment at this point, right? So because we are running such a collector on all the workload clusters, we are collecting the data about the NF deployments. We are enriching this data with those labels because we added them, and we can push this data both to the local and the central backend. And this data is added in the processor's phase, right? So here we say that we have we would like add some attributes with the label at source, Kubernetes objects, and for example, this is just for the debug, like we are adding the data source to see in the backend, which is the data source, and for example, Kubernetes object. And we are adding the data I mentioned from the labels, cluster name, region, and center. Exporters are straightforward. We just say where to push metrics, where to push traces, and where to push logs, both to the local and the central. As you can see, for the local, we have fully qualified domain name of the Kubernetes, like we are using services. And for the central, we are using the specified and specialized buckets. The last part I did just the pipelines for how the data flow is going for all kinds of parameters. So this is, let's say, interesting. coming back, if there are that like if you have any questions, because it may be fast.
Yeah,
Just
Piotr, I have one
interrupt.
question. I have one question, if I may. So you observe the Kubernetes objects, right? But the fields that you use, for example, NF deployment status, do you have to customize it, or let's say you pull the object? So basically, do you just pull the whole object and that's it, and then
Yes,
figuring out
for
which
now.
field is in the object is subject to processing somehow?
For now, we are pushing entire object,
Okay,
and
I see.
there are no results because I need to change the query to see all the results. But this is where the connectors or the processors comes, because we
Yes.
are wondering if pushing the entire object to the Elasticsearch as a log is a good approach. Maybe we should use the connector to translate this to the metric, and it's possible. We didn't yet do that, but it is possible. Also, we could put it as a log, but do not take all the data, just the data which is interesting for us, right?
And you have to configure that in the processor, or can you also do it in the kube object fetcher, that you can specify the fields only rather than the full object?
Well, it's a part for the processors. I mean, you can use existing processors and just add or remove the fields, or you could implement the processor by your own, and then change the object
that is
as you wish.
So in the OTel itself, when you configure it to fetch the object, you cannot specify fields. It has to be done later. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not that kind of expert. This is my understanding that at the moment when I configure
if you go back to so this configuration, can you specify the value or the field, like the JSON path of that object, instead of the full object?
Here, I can't, but it's by design because you have processors, so it's probably would be strange to define the data.
No, not the data, just the field. So if you know I am only interested in this field, why you populate the whole object, just put that field in play? That's what I was thinking.
But of course, for each
I'm not saying it's what is right or wrong. I'm just trying to understand what is possible.
Yeah, well, everything is possible, but it depends on which part of the pipeline you will put the data processing. Because it can be done in the pipeline we define, but it also could be done in the Elasticsearch or any other backend, because it's not always the best idea to process the data on place. It depends. Open Telemetry is progressing, and there is a lot of mechanisms to do that. At this point, we have an entire objects. We are considering only aspects. If we would like to have this as logs, or maybe we would like to have it as a metrics. So then we need to probably define some connector to translate. Well, okay. We prepared kept packages for all the components I described, and of course package variant sets. So in the Nephio, from the Nephio perspective, we can see that, for example, on the edge one, we have backends, we have the 5GC operator and the UTF. Also, we have auto deployment collector, auto daemon set collector, and auto operator. And it's the same for each workflow cluster. we are using, let's say, Nephio native approach to deploy all the components. And the last thing is that we are able to auto-instrument traces. It's not very well working. I mean, I have the Jaeger, let's say, which is the remote Jaeger. And at this point, you can see that I have only traces for NRF and WI. The reason is that I set up the 35GC a priori because it's taken a lot of time to set up everything, but I did not yet try to run the URLs, so we can do it together. Let's see what we have here. On the 35GC, 35GC is deployed on the regional, just like it was in the Nephio 35GC exercise. The difference is that all the network functions are managed by the operator, so no manual installation. As you can see, we also have more than one container, because just like I said, we defined in the operator adding additional annotations, and those annotations are related with zero total auto instrumentation. So if you describe well, before GC, you see down to IMF, the annotations are like this. So for the Golang, we need to add, first of all, the annotation that we would like to inject the auto instrumentation. I mean, it could be set for the entire namespace, but at this point we are setting this per network function. And additional, which is not, I mean, it's easier in other languages, but for the Golang, we need to specify the path of the binary in the container. So those two allow us to add the auto instrumentation and then get, I don't remember.
These here, these just called instrumentation.
Okay, yes, instrumentation. So this is very simple CR, which needs to be a priori deployed to the specific, let's say, Kubernetes cluster, where we specify namespace where to auto instrument and exporter where the traces, in fact, will be exported. So as you can see, again, we are using fully qualified domain name, which is the daemon set collector for the workflow cluster. So, and thanks to that, the second container in the pod is being created, right? For all
And Piotr, just to be clear, I mean, with the auto instrumentation, you don't have to compile the free 5GC, right? It will use the binary to figure out what to send to the collector, right?
Exactly. The only two things which are required are those annotation I showed you and applying this instrumentation CR.
Yeah.
And of course, we need Open Telemetry operator to evaluate the instrumentation CR. Well, I wanted to go to try around the URLs and see if any traces will be generated. It's running. Let's see what will happen. But I can say more. I mean, this metadata I added, those are only labels, but it could be enriched further. The good thing is that, for example, in the Prometheus or MyMir, because it's MyMir, I can specify, let's say, a cluster name. Well, not this one. Oh, cluster name. As you can see, he's aware about Edge 1, Edge 2, regional, and the Nephio, because those are the clusters I created. I can select the Nephio. I also added alter data source. I can see the pulse metrics and send the query. This is the same for the logs, just as like I showed you. Here I have, for example, the data source Kubernetes object and labels find any deployment. I can query, and I can see the newest logs related to the kind and then deployment. Again, I could specify also labels dot cluster name, and again it's aware about all the edges, regional, and the Nephio. Thanks to that, we added this data in the specialization phase. And try to enrich. Let's see. Checking the readiness. Maybe I should help realize it to serve. Maybe just have not enough. But meanwhile, do you guys have any questions, or you, Martin, do you think I missed something which is important for the case to explain? Maybe going back to this architecture. Do you guys think that the observability should be moved to the, let's say, observability cluster or some kind of observability entity, and then Nephio would need to query the data from the external, or the remote backend should be placed in the management itself? Do you have any opinion on that?
I think we should provide options, right? So, see, the problem that you have with the data is that the huge amount of storage, right? Sometimes needed. But I believe our framework should allow for both, right?
The framework allows that. Wondering about the POC, because framework is very straightforward. All you need, and the backends can be arbitrary. You just need to provide the endpoints.
Yeah, actually, I agree with this approach, because that allows third-party systems to access observability data without granting them any things on our management cluster side. So it's actually a pretty good idea.
Yeah. But I think, Steven, you could even deploy it on a separate cluster on the management server and provide the right access controls, right? So, because at the end of the day, it's an API.
Yeah, right. No, I mean,
it shouldn't matter where it runs.
I mean, the
shouldn't matter
cluster
where
separation. Yeah, it doesn't. So the cluster separation is, well, I mean, you can have different kube controls and different outbacks to allow people to just allow people, even if it's on management cluster, you wouldn't be able to see it. This separations kind of make it that the observability cluster as something that is dumping data and kind of a read read-only cluster. Read-only meaning that external people would be reading directly from the clusters directly. I mean, it's not a really big difference per se, but then you're exposing different cluster admin controls over to others. Again,
Oh,
Outback allows you to do the pretty fine granularity pieces of things already. So,
but to access the data, you don't go via the Kubernetes API. They have their own APIs anyhow, right? So that's. So in my view, for a POC, Piotr, I think it's better to, let's say if you integrate into Nephio, it's better to combine on the management cluster because we are anyhow constrained with resources, right? So if you set up an environment in CI space, you have to replicate it and you have to be able to have the resources to set this up, right? So from that perspective, it's easier to integrate on the management cluster. I think in reality, it's probably going to be separated depending on the environment, but our framework should be flexible, in my view, to be able to allow for all of these.
Thankfully, it is. The major missing piece, of course, is the security. We are not trying to deal well with the security at this moment. We are not an experts, but indeed, if we like to make it separate, we need to make sure that every communication is secure. For now,
but we are. So if you
though,
look to the security, work, if we have the workload identity framework in place, it shouldn't even matter where it runs.
that's what we are trying to assume here. And, we believe there will be some mechanism to pressure.
But that might be so you might have to add a sidecar container to it to make that happen. But okay, that's again orthogonal to where you run at the end of the day.
Am I audible, guys?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much. I think it's really good, interesting to see things in action. So thank you so much, Peter and the team, for the demonstration in the walkthrough. I also part of the ORAN discussions in the SEG1. We have the work group dedicated for the ORAN. Have you had a chance to thought about, again, a follow-up to what Wim was mentioning, like the extensibility and sort of a flexibility in the framework? Like how will this architecture align with the ORAN in general architecture, where you have the separation of concerns between what should be available and exposed over O2 interface in SMO layer versus you have the OCloud infrastructure, which has management services like IMS and DMS, which then might have potentially the exposure of the data, which is much more granular and more detailed. Have you had a chance to thought about that scenarios as well?
I mean, more or less. I mean, the observability is very big topic, and indeed you have the entire ORAN work going on. Let's say even the rig part, yes, but also in the code with the on WDAF, everything is kind of related to the data collection and maybe some machine learning, the data processing, and it's always good to ask how to integrate that. The good point about using Open Telemetry is that it's an emerging standard and it's very flexible. Thanks to that, you have the receivers and you can use out of the box, or you can define your own, just like processors and exporters, and also connectors and extensions, which I didn't mention here. So as a framework, it's very, very extensive. For now, as a POC, I didn't try to think about it. I mean, because we are, let's say, small team working on that, and very small team working on that, and we tried to do something rather than nothing, and the ORAN is very big part to include.
No, agree, and absolutely. I think I mean, not just in the Nephio ORAN discussions, it's one of the key topics around observability and what piece of information that shall be exposed. It's also in the ORAN, it's very much active. And last week we had the face-to-face discussions, and observability was one of the key topics, discussions about data granularity that has to be exposed over O2 in SMO. So, okay, thanks for the comments.
Yes. I believe the very important note that for now, for the CR here, for the Open Telemetry collector, the specialization was only for providing the backends and some metadata here. But if we talk about the framework, that would be a good idea to have some operator, or I don't know, cat function, probably operator, to fill all this configuration. And then you are very flexible. You can even use intent-based somehow the observability. I mean, of course, you need to extend the framework to define some CRs that you will defining some ORAN KPIs, and then this operator will be aware how to map those KPIs to the configuration of the auto collector. But as you may know, it's very hard to do in a very small team. So if the community would be interested, we can try. But last time when we this meeting, we will just the same people who are here, right? And it's not very big team. Implement very interesting use cases and integrations.
Yeah, no, I understand. And I think, like you said, about what are the KPIs and metrics that should be exposed and shall be supported by the OTel. I mean, first of all, OTel, yeah, absolutely. This is one of the de facto standards, right, in the community, and based upon the recent developments that has been made in that area. And yeah, I think that's the proposal in ORAN. Like, if possible, how can we do some sort of a standardization around what sort of metrics in the KPIs that should be exposed on a standardized O2 interface, which is like a multi-vendor interface and shall be complied by different cloud infra providers, for instance, and up in SMO, how those informations can be collected and ingested for providing some analytics capabilities, right? So, good.
Well, yes, if there will be any follow-ups interested in working further, we are open in Orange, but maybe to summarize. As you can see, I ran the Ranzim, it worked. I sent the ping, and as you can see, I have some traces from the auto instrumentation, zero code instrumentation. It's not very descriptive at this moment, but it could be adjusted. Also, the eBPF is very promising field, so it should be used not only in the auto instrumentation, but probably it could be used in metrics collection, etc., etc. So there is a lot of work to do. So the question is, do you, I mean, you, Stephen, or you, Wim, or anyone else, do you think anything is at this moment interesting for the Nephio as a release? I mean, I know that we are trying to do here something bigger than the Nephio assumed, and maybe local backends and central backends. One of them may be not very important because at this moment we are duplicating data, no mechanism of data classification. Do you guys think anything is interesting at this moment? You'd like to push something to Nephio, or at this point? No.
One of the things that I have heard people ask about is the observability of Nephio itself.
Yep.
That's why we because we are doing some work, and then we thought how to help Nephio, and this Kubernetes object was a really good fit to collect the information about all the CRDs. It's not only NF deployment, but it's the collection of all the CRDs that are defined. Also, as you could see in the remote backends, we have the Nephio cluster. So all the metrics, logs, maybe not traces at this moment, are available also for the Nephio cluster itself.
Also, one of the problem is the a lot of the data, a lot of the CLDs that gone through the specializers, they don't commit to the API server. So are we able to observe things that are cache on Porch or on Gig?
Well,
no, but I think so, Stephen. Maybe they are not. My view is a bit. They are.
No, I mean, so monitoring the controller pieces, running, and then the liveliness is one thing. But then previously, the Piatra was showing us the ability to know the transitions of the objects. In that case,
but you see, right? So if you go to package resources, you can actually find the status of each of the steps in the pipeline.
So we need correlations. Then we kind of have to see the transformation happening on different, I guess, versions of the objects in package, or different version of the package, or different version of the resource of the package. And then we'll see what the events that actually happens during that time on the controller.
They are exposed. Yeah, they are all exposed there. So you can find out. You don't see the individual object, but there is an aggregated object that you can use to figure it out. And there is conditions to indicate the status, but
also the set of CRs, of course, collected in the workloads, and for the Nephio, they are different because they are different CRs, and you can, in fact, you can adjust the CRs in the configuration. Of course, it requires to restart the collector, but it's not probably very problematic to miss the observability for a few seconds.
That's the thing that I don't like at the moment is unless I misunderstood, is that this data, if you change it, can you, for example, have a second CR with other information that basically says, please collect this, or it's always one big blob?
Yes, that's what I said previously, that at this point we have this configuration which is, let's say, manual. We defined here everything manual. But the good point would be to have is some kind of the operator, and then this could be the part of the Nephio, right? To define some CRs where you can express in the way of intent what you would like to collect, and then you will have this mapping to the Open Telemetry collector. It's not obvious how to do that, and we don't have that on the place, but it's probably feasible to define something like that.
Yeah, but my view here, I think, Piotr, is I would do that in the OTel framework, right? Because this is not specific to Nephio at all, in my view. So it's better to do it in the OTel environment to basically ask for a more dynamic way to express metrics. And as such, that they potentially don't have to restart their system, but just have the ability to add or remove or update these, let's say, sources of information. I think that it should not be done. I mean, this thing, it's a capability that you want the OTel project to provide, in my view, rather than Nephio. You see what I mean?
What we are thinking about, because if you think about some telco related KPIs and then how to map those KPIs to real metrics. I mean,
yeah, correct, but that's secondary at the moment, right? So the first problem that we have to tackle is how can we make let's say, the OTel framework flexible and let's say dynamic to be able to dynamically change sources of information, right? That's problem number one, right?
I mean, of course, you have to restart the collector, but then you can.
But in my view, it doesn't have to be, right? It's not because I add a metric or I add a source that I have to start. If you, of course, change the backend side, then probably yes. But I think they need to provide some more flexibility, right?
It's always better to have a flexibility rather than not. Why not? Well, it's a big topic.
Yeah, I mean, it's an enhancement to the OTel framework, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm
I think it's
expecting-
part of the evolution, right? With every open source product or the tool. It's same with the multis, and similarly here, the
Correct.
dynamicity has to be down the line has to be achieved.
Yeah. And I understand why they did it like this. It's way simpler to do it like this, right? Give us everything and then we will act, right? But eventually, I think this request will come over time from various sources and from various people, in my view. So they will probably, at some point, be able to tackle that.
To be precise, we try to spend a lot of time trying to understand the auto. Auto also is a big project, and then we took some part of it, the Open Telemetry collector CR, and you don't need to use the Open Telemetry operator at all. And you could define your own Open Telemetry collectors, and there are collectors and operators vendor specific. I mean, this is community version, and then you have very flexible framework to deploy many collectors. It doesn't need to be one deployment and one daemon set collector. This is some kind of proposition for the Kubernetes, because then you are able to collect, let's say, all the information, and those information are not duplicated, because yes, this is just a proposition. And then you could have collectors which are being created and then deleted. You can orchestrate the collectors with your needs, and then this is kind of the dynamic change of the configuration at this point. But the question is how you utilize the possibilities that are already in place.
Yeah, correct. But my view is the following, Piotr, right? Of course, if you have a vendor that has certain things that needs to be specialized, the vendor will take care, right? Here we are talking about open source. So in my view, OTel is a framework that serves the community, right? So if we believe that, I feel like this capability of dynamic metric or adjustment of sources, right? I think it's a generic thing that not only serves Nephio, but many other projects. That's how I reason, right? Is then it should probably be done there or try to be done there. Of course, if you get, let's say, pushback, then it's a different conversation. But at least I think, in my view, we should.
I agree. So let me summarize, if I may, because we are running out of time and Stephen probably would like to go to sleep. This is something we are trying to work on. Of course, we have other projects, so the progress is not that fast as we would like to be. I will be really grateful for your feedback. So maybe not now, but if you would like to spend some time and write me a feedback on Slack, what do you think? But really, what do you think? If it has any sense or not, I will be very grateful. And if you will have to do any collaboration in the Nephio for that, I believe we are open. So you know where to find us.
Can you give us links to your work? Yeah, the Git repos and the sample packages and things. Yeah, I mean, we're interested to see, what detail is actually being done, and things that are much more use case specific, I guess, in this case for Nephio.
I
Yeah.
can try to prepare something. Some code is open, like the catalog with
Mhm.
the kept functions,
Mhm.
but some code is closed. And I mean, it's closed because it's on our internal Git lab,
Oh, I see.
but I can try to send you some links. But I will need some time to prepare
Okay.
that.
Okay. So basically, what you have is it's not open source yet, I guess.
It depends how do you define open source. I mean, in fact, you have the kept packages. If you can deploy the kept packages, that's all what matters. I mean, the changes to the free5DC operator, which allows to use the NF deployment CRs for all the network functions are not exposed, but it's not like they are closed. They can.
No, but actually, that's an interesting one. What's the reason why you want to consolidate everything instead of having different controllers?
Just to simplify things. I
I
mean,
see.
still, I just like I said, this is the simple implementation, and many think is hard coded. But I wanted to have the full operator. Just I run the operator and I deploy the network NF deployment, and I don't care about the UGC and the auto instrumentation, etc. I wanted to have some entity to create for me this annotation each time I have them in a flexible manner. That's on what this is the only reason. I'm not trying to set some good practices to Kubernetes operators for the 5G code.
So you have have you tried pumping traffic through, right? So you're able to see the metrics.
Could you repeat?
Have you tried you have to make a 5G call off of the deployment,
Yes.
and then
Yes,
you
I
see
did. I did on the call. And what is the question further?
so you were able to see the actually, so as we talk about many times, by default, it doesn't seem like Free5GC has exposed a lot of metrics off of that end.
Okay, so I get the point. At this point, we have this auto instrumentation that it's only related to the HTTP and gRPC protocol. It's not very useful.
Oh yeah, because it only works with HTTP and gRPC.
But
Yeah.
our colleague from Orange, France, he was performing a PhD on
Yeah, I thought you're trying to do that using BPF.
other
BPF.
protocols.
The BPF
There
side,
is,
isn't the BPF side exposing metrics as well?
at this point, no. I mean, we
Oh,
are
okay.
willing to do that. We have an intern in one lab. We will try to evaluate either. But of course, this is very promising and important topic for the observability, the EVP, to evaluate the usage of EVPF programs to collect metrics. And of course, maybe 5G related protocols, not only the protocols which are, for example, HTTP, is not always useful.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's also very UDP heavy for the entire. Okay. Oh, interesting.
Okay, again, that's all from my side. And positive or the negative feedback is welcome. Please share if you're willing to. And thank you for this meeting.
Yeah. But Piotr, I think in general, I mean, I agree with Steven. I mean, all these capabilities is probably nice to control. I mean, you can put the packages and how to deploy it inside of the Nephio project, right? Because this is a way. So what we would do is this. The way I see it is this is a reference implementation to for observability, right? So I think what you have done is awesome. So we should leverage that and make that. Yeah.
A proof point to use an OTel framework to monitor Nephio. Both the workload side as well as the whole, well, not the control side at this point, but then at least the workload side.
Yeah. So in other words, I mean, what you've done is awesome because we have now what you've basically built is a generic framework to do observability, right? So which is what we kind of were aiming to do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what you have achieved in my view. So.
That was kind of the goal. The problematic part is lack of the exposure. I mean, we thought about implementing some observability controller in form of some kind of APIs, but we didn't yet know how to do it in a good way. It could be just the REST APIs or something like that, but you know, there is a lot of data, and the exposure is probably the case specific. So for now, there is only data collection on, you can query all the backends to find the data you need, but there is no unified way and simplified, abstracted way to interact with our backends. But regarding that, everything else, of course, is, in my point of view, generic and interesting.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean that's a unified way to query and access. I don't. Yeah. That would probably be an OTel problem too, more than us, really. In terms of whether or not we would have some sort of structure or at least some sort of definitions of the KPI that we should monitor across different vendors. That was one of the things that we talked about. I'm not sure when I will do that moving forward.
Yeah, but that would be a good way because, I mean, maybe not a good way, but then if you define the metrics you would like to observe, then you can utilize this information to expose them. And it's not anymore arbitrary data. Maybe it's not that obvious, but that will be easier to expose when you define what you would like to see.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty ambitious. And,
yeah.
So,
I agree. I mean, the challenge that we have, and that's always true, right? I've been spending quite a bit of time in this space these days, is that every vendor will have different ways to expose certain things, right? And aligning that is never going to happen, in my view. I think we should stop the assumption that this will ever happen. So we should build a framework to accommodate for such an environment. I think, yeah, that's my sense of the situation. I mean, I can give you a proof point, right? We have basically in one of the projects, it took us 7 to 8 years to adhere to a single standard to basically accommodate for it, right? That's impossible to do across multiple vendors, right? It's impossible. So in other words, if you build automation and if you build orchestration, you have to build it in such a way that you can accommodate for various vendors. And they will all expose them differently, and your framework should be flexible to adhere to that. That doesn't mean that at the back end you cannot accommodate for generic APIs and basically say, okay, interface statistics for vendor A is done A and B, and then in the generic backend you expose them in a way that you feel suitable, and you have to provide the mappings from each vendor towards that generic thing. That's basically what you will not get away from it.
Yeah, I think the question is, what is the role of the open source if we should use the solutions out of the box or just show the reference implementation, and then people will take and implement more specific for the use case. This is probably the same for this case.
see, I think what you have here, in my view, Piotr, is a framework to basically get information, right, from traces, logging, and metrics in, let's say, a standard way, right? You have not basically said, okay, I'm going to collect this metric in this way for this vendor and stuff like that, right? But you have now a framework that basically does that, right? What is still missing, in, I think, probably is the mapping capabilities, right? To which you could potentially do in the processors, right? And probably there will be other ways in which vendor expose data, right? That you have to integrate. But in my view, that's not the problem of the open source, right? The open source will then provide, if there is generic capabilities that are, let's say, interested, then they will add them to the framework potentially, right? But I don't see what more you can do, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and well, once we have the base framework, then we have to take use case and see whether or not we can see what we really are needing to do. But yeah, but this is a good starting point. We do have a repo under experimental that we can push some of these pieces, at least links and references, if anything, for on the repo, so that we know we have a POC already in place. Folks can kind of discuss out of that POCs, and then particularly because this is very workload related, something like SA. I don't know what they're doing now, but then someone like SA, if they want to map their use case based on that framework, maybe we'll get some. We'll be able to see, you know, in terms of use case specific things, whether there's something we can add.
Mhm.
But that
Okay, guys,
that could be a very quick step. I think you know, the SA folks, the Sebash, would be very happy. But then I do agree that there are others in the communities. I think the observability, when we talked about them, they actually prioritize observability of the system over workload monitoring, which I actually, on the other hand, is what we started to do, which is workload monitoring first. Yeah, but then if the framework can also cover that, that would be great.
I agree with Steven. When we were in the one summit, we brought up the topic, right? And then everybody said, let's observe Nephio first.
The
Right.
talk itself is related to our infra on the OpenStack. If anyone has OpenStack, it will be easy, but it's probably better to just to more generic user rather than OpenStack.
No, but for example, it goes also into the mode of, okay, all the Nephio, like ports, right? So there is some challenges with ports these days. So how do we observe ports? How do you observe the specialization that is happening that Steven alluded to before, right? So, and use OTel to do it, right? For example, ports has OTel instrumented already in the code. So you could basically take those metrics already from ports and figure out what's going on. So all the API calls that are happening in ports are monitored through an OTel tracer.
Well, if they are monitored, it's only the matter of directing to the additional collector or scraping the OTL.
So we don't have anything to even just collect them at this point. So if we can leverage the same framework, then we can expose that on observability cluster, whatever thing is on whatever backend we choose to use on a standard deployment or at least reference deployment, and then can just tell users that this is the place where you can see that, oh, your approval server is taking 3 hours before they can approve something. Then we can clearly see that actually happening. A certain state transition has ever happened. So that would help a lot, because it's from R1 to R2 to R3, it's getting longer and longer for sure. Yeah.
We will try to see also on this aspect.
I mean, just I don't know what you can. You show us a lot, great. What you can expose to us so that we can start checking out the framework that you have, and see if we can use it on various different cases. Our priority is the system health is important. The observing the system is important. There are many people interested in that. I really do feel that R3 is more or less a stability phase right now, which is great actually for a project perspective. So if this framework could be used for that purpose, that would help us a lot. And then moving forward, obviously as you've shown, we can also do monitoring workloads. And I think there will be a specific use case that can leverage that. And folks will be more familiar with we have to use Prometheus SQL to query something or things like this as part of our standard way of observing the system. Then it would be a little easier for documentation purposes and user consumption purposes. So yeah, your framework is absolutely useful. So no doubt about that.
Okay, great. We will see what will come next.
Yeah. Yeah, we can talk about that on Slack. I can see what you can expose on whether or not any of us can bring up the system the way with your packages and things, and then start trying that on maybe Porch and things, or the management clusters. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great job, by the way. Oh, yeah.
So we should conclude, right? And I mean, conclude and finish. So thank you very much for this feedback and the meeting, etc. And I will give you, just like I said, I will give you notice if anything will be exposed from my side, from our side, but it will take at least a few days.
Okay, no, that is great. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.
Okay.
Thanks. Take care.
Cool. Thanks. Bye.